Imagine a massive shipyard hall, opening up kind of like a giant cathedral. A sleek, black submarine hull slides sideways into this freezing gray water, right? And then the surface just seamlessly closes over it. Now, look at a map of the Arctic Ocean. You're not going to see any brightly lit coastlines or bustling shipping lanes. It is literally just this white, solid lid of ice over a pitch-black, silent bowl. If a single sonar ping goes out from the center, it never comes back. So in this explainer, we're going to take a really measured documentary-style look at this completely unseen battleground right beneath the polar ice. We are exploring a major surveillance gap in one of the most critical oceans on Earth, and we're walking that incredibly delicate line between what is suspected and what is actually proven. Okay, let's dive in. July 28, 2026. This date is basically our starting point today. On this day, Russia launched a brand new sub called the Ulyanovsk. Now, this isn't just any sub. It is the absolute newest of the Yasen-M class. We're talking a nuclear-powered cruise missile-carrying giant that can engage other subs, surface ships, and strike targets on land. It's actually slated to join Russia's northern fleet by the end of this year, adding to the 5 they've already got across their northern and Pacific fleets, with 6 more on the way. But honestly, the missiles and torpedoes are kind of the least interesting part of this whole story. The real argument happening behind closed doors in NATO capitals right now is about something way more mundane, yet somehow much harder to actually achieve. It is about the simple, fundamental ability to just know where things are under the ice.
To understand why this matters, think about a massive number for a second: 95 to 99%. According to the research firm Telegeography, that is the percentage of all intercontinental data traffic that is carried entirely by subsea cables. We always talk about data being in the cloud, right? But the physical reality is that the electricity and the data of our entire modern world run through this global, physical lattice of cables and pipelines resting right on the ocean floor. And in deep water, these cables, they are not these massive armored tunnels. They're actually roughly the diameter of your standard garden hose. They just lay there on the seabed, completely unprotected, held in place by nothing but their own weight and the sheer indifference of the ocean. Now, these vital, garden hose-sized cables share that seabed with one of the most ordinary, mundane objects in maritime history: the anchor. When a massive commercial ship drops an anchor and drags it across the bottom, it is absolutely not a precision tool. It basically acts indiscriminately, exactly like a plow. It destroys whatever's in its path. And here's the core mystery we're dealing with today. From the surface, a dragged anchor looks physically identical whether it was caused by total incompetence, a mechanical failure, some bad weather, or deliberate malicious intent. On a chart, they all look exactly the same.
Moving on to Section 1. What happened versus what was proven?
Let's look at the facts and treat this almost like a courtroom ledger. In November 2024, the vessel Yi Peng 3 physically dragged its anchor across roughly 300 kilometers of seabed, completely severing 2 cables between Sweden and Lithuania. That's the physical fact. But legally, Sweden's investigation authority came out and stated they just could not determine with absolute certainty if the damage was intentional. Next, fast forward to December 2024, the tanker Eagle S damaged the EstLink 2 power and data cables. By October 2025, the Helsinki District Court actually dismissed charges against the officers, but strictly on jurisdictional grounds, basically pointing out that the act occurred in the exclusive economic zone, not territorial waters. And then, back in January 2022, an undersea cable serving Svalbard was damaged by something dragged along the seabed. Norwegian police eventually just closed the case without finding it to be a deliberate act. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, while officials might go on TV and describe a campaign of sabotage, actual investigators and courts who are working to a much higher evidentiary bar repeatedly stop short of declaring deliberate intent.
Obviously, NATO was pretty uncomfortable with all this ambiguity, so they tried something radically different in the Baltic Sea. By January 2025, they launched what they called the Baltic Sentry mission. Now, according to NATO's own assessment, and we do have to remember this is the alliance grading its own homework here, their response times to suspicious incidents plummeted. They went from about 17 hours down to just 1 single hour. I want you to just sit with that for a second. 17 hours? That is plenty of time for a vessel to drop an anchor, drag it over a cable, pull it back up, and completely disappear. But 1 hour? 1 hour means the authorities arrive while the ship is still physically sitting right there.
So why did Baltic Sentry work so incredibly well? Well, it all comes down to what we can call the Baltic bathtub advantage. The Baltic Sea is shallow. It's a very narrow basin, and crucially, it is ringed almost entirely by Allied coastline with really dense overlapping radar coverage. The geography is just incredibly generous for tracking ships. NATO didn't magically make those undersea cables invincible. They simply made the seabed highly observed. It literally became a bathtub where practically everything can be seen.
However, as you might guess, intense observation does not mean these incidents entirely stop. Look at this timeline. Before January 2025, 11 Baltic cables were damaged in just the 15 preceding months. But even with that shiny new Sentry mission in place, things still happened. In January 2026, the BCS East cable was damaged near Liepaja. Latvian police actually boarded a vessel, but they found no evidence of its involvement. Then, in February 2026, a cable between Finland and Germany was damaged near Gotland. Swedish authorities opened up a sabotage investigation, although the damage in that case was minor. The takeaway? The mission improved the odds immensely, for sure, but it absolutely didn't eliminate the risk.
Let's transition to Section 2, the anti-bathtub Arctic physics.
So if the Baltic is a bathtub, the Arctic is the exact opposite. It's an ocean basin measured in millions of square kilometers, and the water itself actively fights you. You see, detecting a submarine is purely an acoustic problem, right? And the Arctic is an acoustically hostile nightmare. Here's how it compounds. Step 1. The shifting ice is incredibly loud. It naturally grinds, cracks, and roars, filling the water with all this background noise. Step 2. The underside of that ice isn't just a flat sheet. It's heavily ridged, meaning any sound waves that do hit it scatter entirely unpredictably. And step 3. The really cold surface water layer actually bends sound waves downward in a way. So put all that together, and a quiet submarine tucked right under the ice can be almost entirely impossible to hear. You can't just drop sonar buoys through thick pack ice, and satellites definitely can't see through the frozen surface.
Which brings us right back to the Ulyanovsk. Here is where we have to balance two very different perspectives. On one side, we have the strict, unadorned technical facts regarding this new submarine's real-world capabilities. On the other side, we have advocacy and analysis organizations, like the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, arguing that this expansion highlights a massive, glaring NATO surveillance gap. Now, it's really important to note, they are not accusing this specific sub of a specific malicious act. Rather, they are pointing out a rapidly growing capability that is currently facing a total lack of visibility.
To really get to the bottom of this narrative, we need to unpack three entirely distinct questions that often get lumped together in the headlines. Question 1, does Russia field highly capable Arctic submarines? Based on the public record, yes, absolutely. Question 2, has any state been formally, legally proven by courts to have deliberately cut a cable in the incidents we just examined? The strictly factual answer to that is no. And question 3, would NATO actually know if an intentional act happened under the Arctic ice tomorrow? Now that is the real intelligence gap. And of these three questions, it is the only one that remains completely unanswered today.
Okay, moving to Section 3, building a witness.
So, how is NATO responding? Well, they're pouring massive resources into trying to figure this out. We're talking major experiments here. There's Arctic Sentry, which kicked off in February 2026 to boost presence. Then there's Task Force X-Arctic, launched in June 2026, using a research vessel to test uncrewed maritime sensors and data sharing. You've got Denmark throwing down a huge €3.9 billion package for Arctic vessels, drones, and command centers. And all the while, the asset they're trying to protect just keeps growing, like the massive 15,000-kilometer far north fiber trans-Arctic cable that's being laid down. But crucially, look at every single one of these military initiatives. They all share one sobering reality. They are not yet a system. These are all basically high-stakes experiments just trying to find out if this kind of capability is even possible under the ice. Right now, new value is arriving on the seabed significantly faster than new eyes are.
And that brings us to the absolute core thesis of our explainer today. Let's look at this idea. What changed in the Baltic was not firepower, but witness. Think about that. This is exactly how deterrence in this gray zone fundamentally operates. It isn't always about threatening retaliation with a bigger, scarier missile. It is really about the near certainty of being seen. In the Baltic, an anonymous act suddenly became an act with an audience, simply because the response time shrank down to a single hour.
But under the Arctic ice, NATO has no audience. A submarine you can see is a deterrence problem, and militaries have spent decades figuring out how to solve those. But a submarine you absolutely cannot see, that is an intelligence problem, and that problem literally has no solution at all until someone successfully builds a sensor that works. So we end up facing this incredibly stark reality. Beneath millions of square kilometers of noisy, shifting ice, in freezing water that swallows sound whole, we're left with this massive, silent gap. Which leaves us with one final, pretty uncomfortable question to consider. Can you actually deter what you cannot see?